This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for joining this week's NC Spin. This was a tense week in the Tar Heel State. We start with the legislature attempting to override Governor Cooper's vetoes and batting 0 for 5. The Senate got testy with the House, a stressful Council of State meeting, and owners of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline throwing in the towel. We'll discuss the financial stresses of our local governments. And as always, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Joining our panel this week are Becki Gray, Vice President of the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon, Director of the state's Newsroom, John Hood, Syndicated columnist and author, and we welcome back to NC Spin after too long an absence, Dennis Wicker, the former Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina. Last October, many of you might know, Dennis had a heart transplant, and we're glad to have you back, Dennis.
I'm glad to be back, glad to be with the panelists. I've really missed being on the show. Good to be here.
And you are a living, walking miracle, and I wanted to put up on the screen, there are two organizations that if you want to know more about organ transplants, get in touch with these two organizations, donatelife.net or registerme.org. You can get plenty of information about transplants. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussion after these brief messages from our underwriters. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Let's begin the spin. As we said in the intro to the show, whether it was stress from the virus or the July heat, it was a pretty tense week around North Carolina, and we want to talk about it. Beginning with the legislative session this week, convened to override 5 vetoes from Governor Cooper. Question 1 to Becki Gray. Lawmakers went 0 for 5 in their override attempts. Now, typically, leadership won't put a bill on the floor for a vote if they don't think they have the votes to pass it. Did they think they had the votes, or was it just a test?
I think they thought there was a chance of it, and they felt like it was important enough in order to do this, to take that risk. 3 of those bills had to do with small businesses being able to reopen, and the General Assembly has been consistent with their attempts to override the governor at every turn with these executive orders to allow some of these small businesses to go ahead and open. Also, another one had to do with clarifying the emergency powers of the governor, something that many people feel like after these months and months and months of this emergency that in order to have some sort of input from the Council of State was really worth doing. And then the other bill was a Second Amendment Protection Act, which actually the first time it went through had enough votes that it would have, had those votes stuck, would have overridden the governor's veto. So, I think this was a good faith attempt to do what they felt like was right. The bottom line with this is now they have all of those people on record as to how they're going to vote. And I think that we will see this message of some members of the General Assembly have chosen party over politics and party over their constituents. I think we'll see that. I think we'll see that as we go into November.
That message is going to flow both ways, Becki, during the elections. Chris, that wasn't all the tension that was going on in the legislature this past week. The House and the Senate seemed to be having problems with each other. The House got frustrated. The Senate wouldn't put in a fix for Senate Bill 168 that the governor vetoed, that everybody agreed needed to be fixed. In addition to that, they wouldn't agree to permission to give the schools the permission to operate online in the first few days. Changing a law which it said they had to be present. What's going on between these two houses?
Well, I think this is a natural tension you see. I think Senator Berger is drawing lines in the sand that Speaker Moore doesn't agree with. Speaker Moore basically said he thought on the school issue an executive order might be able to do it anyway. To get back to Becky's point, though, it's a little. I hope they do. People do remember how people voted. 75% of people in North Carolina believe we're either opening at the right pace or we're opening too quickly. So I think the prevailing view, as we have record hospitalizations in North Carolina. One other quick point I want to make. We were talking a few weeks ago how horrible it was. Some people said we wouldn't let bars open. There are states all over the country now that had open bars that are closing them again as the consensus builds. Arizona, Texas, Florida, as the consensus builds that bars are exactly the wrong place to have open while we're trying to stop this pandemic.
And Dennis, this reopen North Carolina movement went to the legislature and urging our lawmakers to pass an impeachment bill against Governor Cooper. Any grounds for this? I mean, this is basically unprecedented. We've only had one governor that was impeached, and that was Governor Holden. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. Look, I just think this is another ploy to try to soften the governor's positions on keeping the things closed or in the phase 2 area where he is now. It's a small minority, I think, of people who are protesting this. Impeachment is just a wild pitch. I don't know why they would even propose such a thing. I think it's going to fizzle out very quickly.
Well, it gets people like us to talk about it, I guess. John, this Council of State, the relationships between the governor and the Council of State seem to be just dropping down a level just about every time. This past Tuesday, they had a Council of State meeting that Governor Cooper kind of abruptly called to a halt after it was very obvious that there were tensions between the Republican majority of 6 and the Democrat majority of 4, a minority of 4 on this. The big deal was Governor Cooper's need to reach concurrence, the Emergency Management Act. Norma Houston, who for many, many years has been involved in legal issues, she is a lawyer with the North Carolina UNC School of Government, says that the same thing Judge Orr told us, Justice Orr told us. This is a vague law. If anything, it needs to be clarified, but right now, she thinks the governor has the authority to be able to make these decisions.
Well, that's one person's opinion. There are many other lawyers on different sides of this particular issue, but you made a point that's really important to underline. Just about everybody, except the governor, believes that the original laws are vague and it is unclear and that it needs to be clarified. That is what the legislature tried to do. The governor vetoed an attempt to clarify the language. It is very difficult to believe that when the legislature originally enacted these measures, that they intended for an emergency to be indefinite.
Right.
I mean, they were talking about a flood, a hurricane, a tornado, something that has a limited time frame. The governor absolutely needs to act without approval for a brief time. No one could possibly have imagined the governor would claim that he could open and close businesses indefinitely into 2021 or 2022, which is his current position. That's unreasonable. He should have allowed, with his veto or with his signature, or at least not vetoing it, should have allowed this law to be clarified. That tells you that he does not want to give up unilateral power that no governor should ever have.
Doesn't want to give up the power, Chris, or would like to have a level playing field when these discussions are held?
Well, this isn't the first time we've had a debate about who has the power in North Carolina. It won't be the last. I think it's instructive. I do think the majority of people in North Carolina believe Governor Cooper is exercising his power wisely and cautiously, as the polling that I mentioned. I think we're seeing around the country that the vast majority of Americans and North Carolinians are very, very worried and nervous about the pandemic. And that's why I don't think you see a big outcry among the majority of the people. I do want to go back quickly. The Reopen North Carolina, remember, this is an organization, one of whose founders played the national anthem while she was burning a mask, saying she would not have the tyranny of wearing masks. So I think that's that's where we've gotten to in this debate, where we have people burning masks that are designed to protect other people from being infected.
Becki, let's go bowling. The bowling bill that passed the legislature was an anomaly that sort of came out of left field that nobody really knew exactly how to deal with. The bowling alley started opening. They took it to court. The judge, the governor's administration asked for a stay on their opening. The judge said, nope, we're going to go forward. The governor's now going to get a ruling from the Supreme Court. How do we differentiate between bowling alleys and bars and gyms?
That's the question, and that's really the challenge and the problem that the governor has had as he has begun to open up North Carolina. Then that line becomes grayer and grayer and grayer. And it really comes down to, at this point, the governor and Secretary Mandy Cohen are picking winners and losers. Now, it was interesting that this judge is looking at some of these other cases, too, that would allow other industries to open up. What he did is he went in and looked at the safety precautions and the protocol that the bowling alleys had said that they would do. And he said, you know what, this makes sense and this fits within the protocols that we would expect. Now, what he does with some of the other industries and the protocols and what they have said they're going to do, but, this is, again, an illustration of how frustrated these small business owners are. They've tried to do this through the General Assembly. The governor has stood in the way. Again, he vetoed these bills. They are now using money that they don't have to take this to court so that they don't lose their life savings in their businesses.
Dennis, let's move over to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. This has been disputed ever since it first got started. It has stopped and started it, and the court has said finally that they could go across the federal parks lands. But Duke Energy and Dominion threw up their hands this past week and said they're going to cancel the pipeline after having spent, billions of dollars on it? Who are the winners and losers on this?
Well, I don't think there are any necessarily winners. I think there are some losers. The pipeline, of course, went through all this process that you just described, and then for all of a sudden they say, well, we're not going to do it after spending billions of dollars on it. Certainly, the question you have to ask is, who's going to pay for the $2 or $3 billion they spent on it? Is it going to be the ratepayers? Is it going to be the shareholders? Certainly, I think it leans more toward the shareholders because this was a decision made in the corporate boardroom to start this pipeline and then to end it.
And the Utilities Commission may end up having to make that decision as to whether it comes out of ratepayers or shareholders' pockets.
Well, that's exactly where I was going, Tom. I think that's where that's going to head, and that's where that's going to be decided.
John, let's talk a little bit about the state auditor's new audit for DOT. She came back saying DOT spent $39 million in giving pay raises to employees, some of which had been authorized because of the fact that DOT had gone to the legislature saying, hey, we're not able to hire the kind of professionals we need because we're not paying competitive wages. They didn't anticipate $39 million worth. And State Auditor Wood says, whoa, you went way out of bounds here. Now, the DOT secretary says, we did what was authorized.
Yeah, this is an old dispute that I think we may have mentioned on the show before, and it has to do with what the intention of the legislature was when it authorized DOT to spend a certain percentage of funds. Some legislators say, well, we intended this percentage on a small pot of funds. DOT interpreted it to be a much larger pot of funds. Obviously, you can have the same percentage if it's applied to a larger denominator, in this case, a very large amount of the DOT budget, then you have all this money to spend on pay raises. Beth Wood, the state auditor, is basically siding with the legislative majority saying that it was not intended to give the DOT this amount of authority to give pay raises, but DOT did challenge it. You see a lot of times with state audit reports, the department will accept most or all of the conclusions. They did not accept this conclusion. They contested it.
I have decided that if I worked in state government, I would not want a phone call from Beth Wood. Becki, the legislature is essentially gone home for a large part of the summer. They got to wait to see what the state revenues are going to be after July 15th. when the personal tax returns come in, then they're going to have to grapple with a budget. When do you expect to see them come back into session and really get serious about a budget?
Well, there's a couple things that are outstanding. First of all, Tom, they have passed a series of mini budgets and taken care of a lot of the state needs. You know, enrollment growth in the schools. Right. They gave the teachers a raise. So they have taken care of a lot of the budget things. So we're okay there. Kind of the big outstanding thing right now, though, is what is Congress going to do with this CARES money, and will they allow flexibility to spend it depending on each state's individual needs? So we're all on kind of pins and needles waiting for some sort of decision on Congress. If they grant that flexibility, then it really opens up.
They may have to come back in for that.
Right.
Yeah. We know COVID-19 has hit the North Carolina state government's revenues as much as $4 billion. But our local governments have also been seriously impacted and need help. Let's talk about that a little bit, beginning with an executive order from Governor Cooper that says a person cannot have their water or electricity cut off if they don't pay their bill because of COVID-19. This was designed to help people who had lost their jobs during the early part of the pandemic, but it's now become a problem for local governments that own and operate electric distribution and also water systems. Tuesday's Council of State meeting, Treasurer Falwell asked the governor to rescind the order since statistics are showing 13% of customers have used this as an excuse not to pay their bills. Chris, this is a case where helping you is hurting me. What needs to be done here?
Well, I think we need to balance the need. We still have millions of people in North Carolina who can't work because of the pandemic, who are worried about losing their utilities, which put them in an even worse spot. I think we're going to see a rise in evictions around the country, maybe in North Carolina. But we have local governments who are struggling. As we say often on the show, local governments are the creation of the General Assembly. I think we need some legislative response here fairly soon to help local governments and figure out how to bridge this gap.
Dennis, a lot of interest has been paid on this CARES Act money that is coming into. We got $3.5 billion from the feds on this, and the legislature has only appropriated something like $1.6 billion of it. Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger has been asked about giving some money to the local governments because they are gasping for air right now. He says that North Carolina is a bit unique because, unlike other states, our schools and our roads are largely paid by the state, not by the local government entities. Is he right? And should we be funneling some more money to these local governments?
Well, this is an instance where I'd probably disagree with my friend Senator Berger on this issue. Yes, we do have our state paying for the roads and the big part of the education in North Carolina. But it seems a little bit odd to me that where we would accept the federal money who's helping the states, you just mentioned $3.5 billion came in from the feds, but yet we as a state won't turn around and help our local governments. So I think we need to really reevaluate that. I would urge Senator Berger to rethink that. And start finding ways that we can help these folks at the local level who are suffering.
John, the state and local governments started a new budget year on July 1st. We've read a lot about local governments, counties and cities throughout the state. I've been fairly interesting. I didn't see many tax increases coming as a result of the big deficits these local governments are facing. Instead, we saw budget cuts. Is that pretty much the way you've read that?
Yes, though we should remember that this situation may persist long enough that we get into another fiscal year, and so there may be greater pressure then. That's what the argument has been for freeing up the federal money, not only at the state level, but potentially, as Dennis said, even at the local level, freeing up federal money to be used for delivery of basic services so you don't end up with either precipitous cuts or painful tax increases in the midst of a deep recession.
There's no question about the fact that our local governments have been affected and impacted just as our state government has. Recently, we've been talking about getting our children back to school, but higher education is also facing a lot of challenges. Let's talk about that for a second. Dennis Wicker, Peter Hans is set to become the next president of the UNC System on August 1st. You're a former law partner of his. You said UNC made an excellent choice in selecting him. Tell us why you say so.
Well, Peter Hans, he possesses the unique skills that are needed right now for the university system, Tom. He has the vision, I think, that can carry the university to the greater heights that it's destined to join in the future. And there are a lot of issues, critical issues, that are facing the university system right now, such as the pandemic. What do we do about that? What do we do about the virtual learning piece and instead of brick and mortars? What are we going to do about higher tuitions where parents can't afford to send their kids to school anymore? But Peter Hans, I believe, will lead the university through these issues and beyond. I'm quite confident that he will do a great job for our system.
Becki, I think they made a very wise pick. He is starting with a lot of problems, none the least of which is getting these campuses back open. You've got problems so far as social distancing. We've got faculty that says they don't feel safe doing this. We've got the problems so far as international students not being allowed to have their visas renewed if they're not in class. This is a pretty big issue that Peter is going to have to face pretty quickly.
They're all big issues, and I think that Peter Hans is uniquely qualified at this time to lead this great university system. He served on the Board of Governors. He was the chairman of the Board of Governors, so some of the unrest and some of the problems on the Board of Governors, he, I think, is absolutely the person that can step in and help with that. Also, he did a phenomenal job with the community colleges, and so this whole notion of higher education and some of the narrowing of those silos that we've tried to do with some students using community colleges and then transitioning into the university. I think, and he's a North Carolinian. And, let's just be honest, there are unique situations politically within the university system, particularly in these troubled times, that I think having a native North Carolinian with the kind of credentials that Peter Hans has, I just don't know that we could have chosen a better leader at this time.
At least he doesn't have to get a road map to go find where some of these communities are in our state.
He's been to all of them as the president of the community college system.
John, I was a little bit amused this past week. Orange County passed an ordinance saying they're worried about students congregating in Chapel Hill. And so Orange County passed an ordinance that all the liquor has to be stopped at 10 p.m. Do you think that's going to stop the students from congregating?
It will stop them from congregating at businesses, and it will simply shift the congregation to other places. If that's their intention, they will accomplish that. I should say, by the way, that Dennis Wicker and I now have two things in common. One of them is that Peter Hans has worked for me as well as Dennis back in his early career.
Oh, really?
Yes. And the other thing is, of course, Dennis has had a heart transplant, and people say I should have a heart transplant. So we have two things in common, at least.
There are not many times that you just totally throw me off subject, but you did that time. Good point to be made. Higher education itself, Chris, is something that has got to be reformed. The business model for higher education, and we're going to talk about this in future shows, is just not working in the majority of cases, as evidenced by the dramatic increases in tuitions and cost of universities. Is this something that Peter's going to have to look at pretty closely, pretty quickly?
Absolutely, but I think he has there are big, giant issues in higher education, but he has his plate full right now because we're in a 100-year pandemic trying to figure out how to reopen 17 campuses, how to keep people safe, how to do all those things. I do think he's uniquely qualified. It's worth pointing out, Peter was elected chair of the Board of Governors when the Democrats ran the General Assembly, and we had a Board of Governors that was 2/3 Democrats, 1/3 Republicans. I think one of the things, and speaking of a long-term issue, we've talked about it many times, we have to change the way the Board of Governors is elected. We either have to give the governor some appointments, other people some appointments. We have to go back to where there are people of both political parties on there. And I hope that Peter, with his knowledge and relationships, can have some sort of independence from the political process. And we need to transform the way we elect those people.
Let's transition and transform into getting the panel to tell us something we don't know. Becki Gray, start us off.
Something that's really been under the radar, Tom. Mission Hospital in Asheville was sold in February of 2019 to a large for-profit hospital corporation. In many of those hospitals across the country, the nurses are unionized. There is a movement underway for nurses at Mission Hospital to unionize, and in the publications and all that they've had, the intent is to unionize Mission Hospital and then move that across the state.
Yeah.
If you are interested and if you believe that North Carolina's long tradition as a right-to-work state is important, this is something you should probably pay attention to.
Well, we're going to be talking also about the New Hanover Regional Medical Center $2 billion sale in future shows. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Update to a story that we've been following of the eastern band of the Cherokee trying to stop the Catawba Nation from having jurisdiction in Cleveland County and having a casino built. They've updated this week their complaint to the Interior Department, and one of the claims the Cherokees are making is that land in Cleveland County is actually theirs. That they have the original jurisdiction, not the Catawbas.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting issue to watch.
Chris, I got a minute left in show. Tell us something we don't know.
Well, I thought we had a consensus that masks were a good thing when Mitch McConnell weighed in, a lot of other Republicans weighed in, Mike Pence. Dan Forrest over the weekend gave a political speech where he questioned the use or the effectiveness of wearing a mask, which I thought was startling for a candidate for governor.
And let me just say to our viewers, all of us came into this wearing masks today. We took them off so that we could be on the show. Dennis Wicker, very quickly, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, as you know, it's hurricane season. It lasts from June 1 until November 30th. They're predicting above normal hurricanes for the Atlantic. The question becomes, what happens if we have a major hurricane on the East Coast a week or two before the election, or God forbid, on Election Day?
And then we got flu season started. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback. Read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Until next week, when we join again, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.